Using tables in Obsidian, you can quickly and easily create a dashboard for your vaults, just like the one you now see. Or better yet, you can include a CSS snippet and make your dashboard look like this. Stay tuned to find out how. Greetings, fellow Obsidizens of the vast Obsidian community. Welcome to another video in the Obsidian for Noobs video series. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use Obsidian tables together with a single CSS snippet to create practical and visually appealing dashboards for your Obsidian vaults. A dashboard is like a table of contents for a vault. It's a logically organized collection of links that enables a user to quickly and easily find and access the important notes and files in a vault. For demonstration purposes, let's imagine that one of my hobbies is cooking, and that I've created a cooking vault to aid me with that hobby. In this vault, I would naturally put recipes for a variety of meals. I might also include some measuring conversion charts for handy reference. It would also be helpful to have the PDF user manuals for any kitchen appliances I own and use available. With that as our premise, let's take a look at our vault. As you can see, my cooking vault contains 4 folders for appliance manuals, breakfast recipes, lunch recipes, and dinner recipes, as well as some loose notes. I don't want a user of this vault to have to rummage around in folders looking for a particular recipe or appliance manual or other document. Instead, I would prefer to have a dashboard that presents all the vault's contents together in one note, logically structured for quick and easy access, like this. This dashboard uses 2 3-column tables to present links to various documents in the vault. Since the recipes are the most important components of the vault, I've logically organized them by meals. So, if I'm looking for an idea for a dinner meal, I can consult the dinner column and choose one of its options. Each listing is actually a link to a document. I can click the link to go to the document, or I can simply hover over the link to see the document appear right here in the dashboard, as follows. By the way, check out my video entitled Pop-Up Note Quick Reference for a detailed discussion of this handy Obsidian pop-up note feature, as well as some useful applications of the feature. Notice that in addition to recipes and snack ideas, I also have a column entitled Appliance Manuals. This column contains links to appliance manuals in PDF format. If a recipe calls for the use of an appliance, and I need to reference its manual for some reason, I can access that manual right from the dashboard. No need to go searching through my vault or a cluttered kitchen drawer for it. Let's add a new table to our dashboard, say for conversion charts. But before we do, let me first do a very quick review of basic table operations in Obsidian. The easiest way to create a table in an Obsidian note is to use the Notes right-click menu. I right-click in a note, I go down to Insert, and I select Table. And Obsidian inserts a 2x2 table, 2 rows and 2 columns. Each box where a row and column meet is called a cell in a table. Obsidian cells can hold text, numbers, pictures, videos, and PDFs. I can add rows to a table by hovering beneath the table until the plus sign appears, and then clicking on it. Each time I do, I insert a new row in the table. Similarly, I can insert new columns by hovering on the right side of the table, and when the plus sign appears there, if I click on it, I get a new column. I can delete rows and columns either by highlighting a row, clicking in a first or last cell and dragging, and then pressing the delete key on my keyboard. Let me zoom in so you can see more clearly. Or I can hover on the left side of a row until one of the drag handles appears. That drag handle is just a rectangle formed from 6 dots. When the drag handle appears, if I click on it, the entire row is highlighted, and if I press the delete key on my keyboard, I've deleted the row. Likewise, if I hover above a column, drag handles will appear there. And if I click on that drag handle, the column is highlighted, and I can delete it with the delete key on my keyboard. In an Obsidian table, the first row is considered the headers row, because typically the first cell in every column usually acts as a header in a table. Obsidian treats the header cells slightly differently from the rest of the cells in the table, particularly with regards to sorting and with regards to styling the table. And we'll see the styling shortly. For a complete detailed discussion of tables, please see my video entitled Working with Tables in Obsidian. Okay, now back to our dashboard. Let's add that table for the conversion charts. I'll right-click, select Insert, and select Table. And Obsidian inserts a 2x2 table. Now remember, this table appears differently from the table in the other note because I've used a CSS snippet to enhance this table, and I'll discuss that later on. Right, in this new table, since I only need one column, I can leave the second column blank, or I can delete it by clicking and dragging and pressing the delete key. In the header cell, I'm going to type conversion charts. And in the cell beneath it, I'm going to put a link to a conversion chart that I already have in my vault. Specifically this chart. It converts cups to ounces and tablespoons and milliliters. I create a link in a table as I would anywhere in a note. I begin with 2 left brackets. Obsidian lists all the files in my vault. I find the conversion chart file, click on it, and a link to that has been inserted into the table. I can click the link to go to the table, or I can hover over the link and have the table appear floating above my dashboard. So that's really all there is to creating a dashboard using tables. You decide what links you want in your dashboard and how you want them organized. You then create one or more tables. You insert column headings in the header cells, and then you insert links to the vault documents in the relevant cells of the tables. But if we want to make our dashboards visually appealing, then we'll need to create a CSS snippet to style certain parts of our dashboard tables. Let's now see how that's done. First, look at how our dashboard looks in Obsidian's default appearance without employing CSS. I'm going into Settings, Appearance, and I'm scrolling down to CSS Snippets, and I'm going to turn off the snippet that I created that enhances the tables. When we go back, you see our dashboard in its normal default appearance. Not bad, it actually looks fine in this way. But if you want to enhance it, then you need to employ some CSS. Before we begin, let me point out that I cannot possibly go into CSS snippets in any detail here in this video, as it's a huge topic in its own right. My book, Obsidian for Noobs, covers the basics of how to create CSS snippets for use with Obsidian, as well as how to incorporate them into your vaults. For the purposes of this video, I'll simply describe the parts of the dashboard CSS snippet I created, and I'll demonstrate how it's used in this vault. This is the code for the CSS snippet I created. A CSS snippet has 3 basic parts: the scope of the snippet's impact, which in this example is this. The properties it will affect, the properties here, are denoted by the text that appears to the left of the colon. This property is the table text color. This property is the table header color, and so forth. And the third part are the values the CSS snippet is assigning to those properties. So for the property of table text color, this snippet is assigning the value midnight blue. For the table header color property, it's assigning the value yellow, and so forth. Of course, not all properties involve colors. For example, this property, table column minimum width, has values represented in characters. There are approximately 80 characters across an Obsidian note. I wanted a 3-column table, so I divided 80 by 3 and got a rough value of 26 characters. And therefore I set the table's minimum column width and its maximum column width each to 26 characters. 26 times 3 is 78. That's close to 80 in whole numbers. So some properties have color values, other properties may have a numeric value. Let's go back to the scope. In this case, I've identified this scope as period table dash dashboard. What I've done here is identify a CSS class so that I can apply this snippet to selected notes. If in place of period table dash dashboard I had put the word body, then this snippet would affect the entirety of my vault. In other words, every table in every note would be affected by this snippet. But as you saw previously, that's not the case. I created a table in this note, and it looks like a normal Obsidian table. When we created a table in my vault, after turning the snippet back on, we get the enhanced tables. The snippet that I'm showing you now was applied only to this particular note. It does not affect the vault as a whole. So again, this identifies a CSS class. If I put the word body there, it would refer to the entirety of the vault. Let me talk a little bit about CSS classes. When I create a CSS snippet, if I put period and a word, or words separated by hyphens, I've created a CSS class. Then in my notes in the properties section, if I select CSS classes and put the CSS class I created without the period in it, remember, I put the class period table dash dashboard. The period is required in the snippet, but when you apply it to a note, in the properties section, you omit the period. By putting that CSS class in the CSS classes section of the properties, I am now saying that this note will be affected by that CSS snippet. And that is why all of the elements within my CSS snippet are illustrated in the tables. Let's go back to the demo note. To open properties, directly below the note's title, type 3 dashes. There are three choices here: CSS classes, alias, or tags. I'll select CSS classes, and I'll select the CSS snippet that we're dealing with. Immediately you see the table changes. The table has now been affected by that CSS snippet. Any table I create here is affected by that. If I remove the CSS class, then everything reverts back to its default. So again, to review, in a snippet, in the scope portion, if I put the word body, then the snippet applies to the entirety of my vault. If I create a CSS class, and by the way, I can give it any name I want to, then this CSS snippet will only affect notes in which I've placed that CSS class. Let's look at the snippet in detail and see exactly what's happening here. Let me first point out that within a CSS snippet, a comment is denoted by /* to open it and */ to close it. Anything contained within a comment is not executed as part of the code. That's there for human consumption. It's there for people to place notes for other human beings so they can see what's happening. It's typical to place a comment at the beginning of a CSS snippet describing what it does, as I've done here. CSS class table enhancements for dashboard use. I also put comments at the end of each line to give you an idea of what's happening here. So this first line in the snippet is setting the table body text color. In other words, the text in the table's body, not in the headers, but in the cells that constitute the body of the table. In other words, the cells beneath the headers. This snippet, this command I should say, is setting the table header text color. So the body text color is midnight blue, the header color is yellow, as you can see. Midnight blue in the body, yellow in the headers. Going down, I mentioned this before. These two snippets are setting a minimum width and a maximum width for each column. And I chose 26 because I know there are 80 characters across the entirety of the note, going horizontally. I divided by 3, and the nearest whole number is 26. I wanted 3 columns in my table, all of equal width. So I did the calculations and then established that in the snippet. Header border color is blue. You might be able to see it here. If you could look at the border, I'm not sure if it's clear, but you can see there's a blue color around the border of the header. Header background color, dark blue. You can see that very clearly. Table background color, alternating rows. In Obsidian, you can set different colors for the alternating rows of a table. One of them is identified with the variable table background, and the other one is identified table row alternate background. So I made one sky blue and one powder blue. And you see the subtle distinction in the 2 colors in the rows as you go down. If I wanted them all the same, I'd have to assign both of those variables with the same color. By the way, these elements here that represent the properties are called variables. The specific phrase or text that's used to identify a particular property is called a variable, and I'll have more to say about that in a moment. Likewise, you can set the hover color. In other words, how the color changes if you hover the pointer over a row. And you can see that I have these kind of pinkish, purplish colors here. So I can see which row I'm highlighting. And finally, I assign the color navy to the link color. The default color wasn't showing up against the background colors that I chose here. So I was forced to give it a darker color. And that's the snippet. Right? All these commands within this one snippet have this effect on tables. From that to that. I have found that one of the hardest things about creating a CSS snippet is knowing the variable names for the properties you want to affect. Fortunately, Obsidian's online help offers an extensive collection of CSS variables for use by developers. If you go to Obsidian's developer docs, and in the left here, click on CSS variables, you'll get an entire listing of the variables for a variety of different components. If you go down to editor and click on table, you get all of the variables that affect tables. And the ones I used in my snippet were taken from this list. I decided what I wanted to affect. I came here to find out how that's referenced as a variable, and then I went ahead and created my CSS snippet. Once you've created a CSS snippet, you have to employ it within Obsidian, and you go about that as follows. First, you have to put the code in a plain text editor, something like Windows Notepad, although there are other possibilities. You then save the file in the snippets folder in your vaults.obsidian folder, and you must save that file with a CSS file extension. This is my Cooking Vault folder. If I open it, I see a folder titled .obsidian. Open that, and there's a snippets folder. And it's in this folder where the snippet files must be saved. And as you can see, they have to have a CSS extension. Now, Windows Notepad, by default, saves its files with a TXT extension. So if you're using Notepad to create your snippets, when you save them, you must change that extension from TXT to CSS. Once you've saved the snippet file in the snippets folder of your vault, then within your vault, you need to go to Settings, Appearance, and scroll down to CSS Snippets, and you must turn the snippet on. Recall before that when I turned this off, we lost all the styling from the snippet. And when I turned it on, we got the styling. Right. After snippets are saved in the snippets folder of your vault, you must come to Settings, Appearance, CSS Snippets, and turn the snippet on in order for it to take effect. Then, if your snippet involves a CSS class, as I described before, as opposed to affecting the entire body of your vault, you have to go into the properties of the note in which you want the snippet applied, open CSS classes and put that snippet in there without the period that was used in the file. Once you've done that, you should see your snippet take effect. Again, I'll demonstrate that here. In CSS classes, I'm going to select the table-dashboard, which is the name of the snippet that I use to enhance the tables. And when I do it, the tables take on the appearance that we saw in the other node. If I get rid of that snippet, we go back to the default appearance for tables. So there you have it, how to use tables and a CSS snippet to create a practical and visually appealing dashboard for your Obsidian Vaults. Okay, fellow Obsidians, that's all I have for now. I'll see you in the next video. Happy note-taking.